All right, so to continue along with the important pre-works here, so the record of the Earth is another important aspect, not only to show the interdisciplinary approach, but also because Fanon traces the formula for how the colonizer weakens or destroys the native cultures. So he created the model of colonization, which is recognized by every post-colonial critic. What has to occur is the denial and negation of the tribal or pre-national reality. So again, think of the Native American population today, right? Lumbee, Cherokee, all that, all of them now are just lumped into, native, indigenous people, right? So there's a denial and negation of their identity. You also have to convert the native peoples to the colonizers' religion. So again, go back to our discussion with feminist ideas with the Navajo. Before colonization, they have a five gendered world. Now, of course, two gendered. They don't want to have gay marriage and all that. So very different from what their religions allowed beforehand. There's also going to be new legal restriction in place introduced by the occupying power to limit their access to goods, services, everything. There's going to be banishment of natives from their lands and their customs and so forth. And again, think of reservations. There's going to be expropriation. So the native lands are now declared owned by the colonizer. And there has to be some sort of systematic enslavement in place, whether it's indentured servitude or what we had, of course, with African American population, right? The African slave trade. So, there has to be some sort of enslavement in order to maintain that power. And again, this is very different from how other empires colonized and conquered worlds beforehand. Again, going back to the Roman, they kept religion, they kept the conquered lands, uh, language. It just very different. So again, this is the model for the European colonization. The pivotal work that really creates post-colonial as a criticism is Orientalism from Edward Said, and this is from 1978. It's the foundational work. And the major premise is basically Western art has represented the other to serve political, religious, and social interests of their makers, meaning that racism exists to take away agency from the other. And again, notice the important connection to feminist theory there with agency. So this othering concept is crucial for postcolonialism. He divided the world into the Occident, Europeans, the West, and the Orient, Asians, and the East. And so basically what he was arguing is that throughout Western art, right, whether it's literature, painting, whatever, that Westerners always created Asian characters to look exotic or to look villainous and so forth, right? There's always some sort of othering involved. Now, some critics, of course, found his focus limiting, but of course, he can't write the entire world into a book, so they're not that well respected. But his ideas advance cultural studies and creates the offshoot of postcolonialism. And to get a good sense of what this othering is, and again, it's not just during colonization, it's post, it's after, and sometimes just as crucial. So the process of othering extends beyond colonization, and the best representations I could do is just a few film ones so you could see the representation, right? So we have The Deer Slayer from 1920, King Kong from 1930, and Face of Fu Manchu from 1960. So this is just a representation of 40 years of American cinema. What do we have? Well, we have white people portraying Native people, right? So we have a European playing a Native American, we have white actors playing African characters, and we have an English white actor playing an Asian character. Notice too how all the othering is reinforced, right? Savages, right? These people are savages. These people are villainous, right? This is crucial for that othering, right? So the dominant culture, even after colonization has ended, the dominant culture will other minorities to reinforce stereotypes and prejudices, right? Racial discrimination is crucial for colonization and post colonization because it maintains that supremacy, right? White supremacy only exists if people still buy into stereotypes and prejudices. So that othering, right, is an important aspect because it keeps suppressing the non major culture, right? The colonized or the former colonized. Now we're getting into important terms. Hegemony, for example, is the political, economic, or military predominance or control of the state, right? One state versus the other. right? The subaltern is the social group who are socially, politically, and geographically outside the hegemonic power, right, structure of the colony or the colonial homeland. So again, today, right, the subalterns would be indigenous people, right, the Native Americans, right? They would be outside the general geopolitical structure, right? They don't have access. A crucial concept is mimicry, and this concerns how the subaltern group accepts and appropriates, right, the hegemonic cultural practices and identity. So think about the preference for lighter skin in a lot of um, uh, movies and a lot of advertisements, right? Think about, of course, the reverse, right? Because that could happen as well, where mimicry happens where the hegemonic culture, in order to advance, right, financially, will take on the subaltern. So think of Elvis, think of Justin Bieber and all that. When white artists steal from non-white artists, right, they get more money, they get more power, right, because people don't want to listen to non-white, but they'll listen to white artists. So it's a crucial aspect. Taylor Swift and all these things that we see mimicry of subaltern cultures as well. And so it's an important aspect because we see appropriation, right? This is what we get into when we talk about cultural appropriation. So the hegemonic power will always benefit, of course, from exploiting the subaltern in many ways. The subaltern will sometimes mimic to try to advance, but the hegemonic culture will also mimic the subaltern in order to steal art and so forth, music, looks, and everything from the subaltern to, again, look cool and so forth. These go into important terms like double consciousness or hybridity. And this is coming from W.E.B. Du Bois, right, The Souls of Black Folk. So in 1903, he's describing the feeling as though a person has made or has more than one social identity, which is, of course, difficult to develop a sense of self then, right? When you have multiple, or in this case, double consciousness, right? If you are a African American and you define yourself as African American, but yet you have a white parent, what do you call yourself now, right? Because you could call yourself black, you could call yourself African American, but then you call yourself mixed. And if you're mixed, what does that mean? And if you have a lighter shade, you call yourself black? All these things are reinforced by colonialism, right? Because now, since colonialism has specifically made us think of identity only in racial terms, now we get stuck, right? And Zadie Smith even expands that to say multiple, or excuse me, personal multiplicity, right? That children of mixed cultures, right, often feel and experience this idea that, oh, I am from numerous cultures, so how do I define myself? I just can't call myself like an Irish American, right? Well, what does it mean to be a whole Arabic and English, and what does it mean to be African English and Arabic, and all these things, right? To kind of play off of the cultural identity. And again, think of college applications, clicking off white, black, right, Asian, right? What if you're mixed, right? What are you just called literally the other? And so all these issues, right? This is what postcolonialism critics study. And of course, cultural assimilation, right? The adoption of the colonized language and customs. So again, Native American cultures in America is always a good one to use since it's familiar with us. So cultural assimilation, personal multiplicity, double consciousness, all these ideas are important terms to look at how the hegemonic culture and the subaltern groups politically try to maintain power, divide power, and so forth. Whitewashing, of course, is the systematic erasure of subaltern representation. So that is a further aspect of that othering, right? So in Western cinema, especially, white actors play non-white characters, even today, right? Or non-whites are the antagonists, right? So excellent show, terrible movie, but notice how in movies, right, the only person we keep as a non-white looking person is the enemy, right? Everyone else is now whiter and whitewashed, right? And we could look at all these examples recently, right, with Aloha, Lone Ranger, and Ghost in the Shell, where we have originally non-white characters portrayed by white actors and white actresses. So whitewashing is again another way that even today the supremacy is in place. Postcolonialism creates an offshoot of academic research called ethnic studies. What ethnic studies is a little bit more expansive than postcolonialism because they don't just focus on European colonization. It focuses on everything. So critics examine how every nation, tribe, or group creates a sense of belonging to one group and views outsiders as others. So if you ever heard the term, again from political science class, ethnic conflict and so forth, this is coming from the culmination of political science, postcolonialism, and then ethnic studies. Ethnic studies is an interdisciplinary study of difference, chiefly race, ethnicity, and nation, right? But also sexuality, gender, and any such markings as expressed by the state, civil society, and individuals. So again, anytime you hear that kind of "I'm not a racist, but," right? This is now ethnic studies, right? We're looking at how people frame identity through racial terms, ethnic terms, and so forth. So this is a little bit different because it focuses on this crucial idea called the racial formation theory. And this is an analytical tool originating from sociology that ethnic study critics trace in art. So the major premise is that race is a socially constructed classification of identity, where the content and importance of racial categories are determined by social, economic, and political forces. The major questions, of course, is what is race? And how do people categorize race and ethnicity? And again, we look at all the kind of ways that white supremacists throughout the ages have kind of tried to keep people down, right, through othering and so forth. But this is what they're kind of focused on is same. So go back to our feminist lecture and queer theory lecture, right? Sexuality, gender is a social construct, orientation is a social construct, right? So, how is race an ideology, right? How is race a belief, right? Not really a natural thing because what are we? We're all the human, right? Homo sapien species. We're all the same race, scientifically speaking, but why do we care so much about the ethnic divisions? And so that's what's really important about that kind of racial formation theory. So let's look at it even further. What does it explore? Well, it explores how race or ethnicity becomes a political weapon of the majority that has several limiting effects on the opposed groups, right? So if you are the hegemonic culture, how are you constantly reinforcing race, racial divisions, right, to maintain power? It also determines freedom of movement. So go back to feminist agency, right? Again, the concept from Descartes, right? But crucial for feminist studies, crucial for queer theorists, and now, of course, crucial for post-colonial and ethnic theory, right? Agency. How free are you to move within society? How does race limit upward mobility from class to class? How does race or ethnicity prohibit or minimize economic gain? And then how is race or ethnicity, how does it have a psychological impact on how the oppressed individual perceives themselves and exists within the confines of the limiting social expectations that have been imposed upon them? This goes into, and we don't have time, of course, in the literature class to really focus on this, but there are a lot of important theories that come from the exploration of ethnic trauma, right? That we carry trauma from our ancestors. And it's a really interesting concept. If you want to learn about it more, there's a lot of good resources on it, a lot of good research on it, but it really explores this kind of concept. So let's look at the purposes, right? So postcolonialism and ethnic studies are critical lenses that help explain how humans create group dynamics and cultural identities. Ultimately, that's what we're trying to pinpoint. And of course, how does literature perpetuate these ideas? Critics using these theories help to trace why groups oppress others, and of course, the consequences of such behaviors. These theories are aimed to explain how people define themselves and align with works of art. And we talked about this before, but this is very crucial, right? When you have a movie with a bunch of black people in the background and then two main characters who are white, people still think it's a black movie. So these are important aspects with ethnic studies and postcolonialisms. Do we read literature only by white people? Do we have a preference for music that's only sung by white people? Time and time again, you'll see that. And that's not necessarily wrong, but that's something that ethnic studies and post-colonialist critics want to figure out. Why is it, right? And so it's another way that we could be aware of our decisions, right? People tend to read books, listen to music, watch movies that represent their culture and identities, right? And that makes sense, but is that a good thing? Is that dangerous and so forth? These theories, of course, further encourage people to explore works of all peoples, and that's really ultimately what we're doing in literature when we're applying ethnic studies and when we're applying post-colonial studies and theory, right? Is that, hey, wait a minute, there's a lot of art made by non-white people, so let's explore that. Let's try to relate to it. And of course, if you need, this publication's available in alternative format, so contact ARC. If you have any questions too, post them to the forum in Canvas. If not, just best of luck to you with the rest of the semester and take care.